And that brings us to the cap conversation, which you've prepared.
Yes, let's talk about money. Let's talk about money, as the Ravens are going to need it at this time of the year. Brian McFarland, as we know, you can go to different websites and see how much cap space the Ravens have, but Brian does what's like the most realistic. Sometimes people will like have it right now, but Brian like already puts in moves that have been announced or things like that, even though it hasn't hit the cap yet. So Ravens have about $6 million in cap space. Bobby, that's not even going to sign your draft class. That's not going to sign your draft class, let alone any free agents. None of that's happening. So, of course, just like every offseason, the Ravens are tight against the cap. And why are they always tight against the cap? Because they're not cheap, despite what people like to say sometimes when they're angry with the front office. They always spin up to the cap. Now, that's the same, right? They're tight against the cap. What's different this year is there's not a lot of obvious places to cut players to create cap space. Okay, so just to be clear here, there are about 3 different ways that you can create cap space. Okay, you can do it by cutting people, you can do it by restructures, or you can do it by extensions. And so sometimes when we bring up Lamar Jackson's money, people start to think that like we're suggesting that the Ravens try to get money back from the deal that they already had. That is not the case. Okay, the Ravens can absolutely open up significant cap space, and Lamar Jackson can make more money. Okay, but let's go through some of these. Let me show you how there's not a lot of good cap cutting candidates. So Brian McFarland put in his data mind. He's that lawyer. We know how Brian thinks. And he put up a list of maybe some guys that could be vulnerable to be cut or traded in order to create some money. But when he put this tweet out, he said, it's a short list and I had a hard time coming up with many. He goes, so I added a few that I really don't think are going to be cut. So the 2 that he doesn't really think are going to be cut is Michael Pierce and Broderick Washington. But he puts it in there in case the Ravens draft big time on the interior defensive line. And so he's like, in that case, maybe we could see them cut. But again, they're not going to open up a ton of money. So what does it matter? If you cut Michael Pierce, you're gaining less than $1 million.
Yeah.
Okay. If you cut Broderick Washington, less than $1 million. So this is how hard he had to stretch to find people. He threw those 2 guys on there. Marcus Williams he has on here, but that $6 million that the Ravens already have, that already accounts for what the Ravens announced, that they're going to cut him. And they redid his contract and all that kind of stuff. So that money's already accounted for in the $6 million. So that leaves really 3 guys: Mark Andrews, Arthur Marlette, and Justin Tucker. And again, Arthur Marlette, he would only create $2 million and 2.25 million. Not a lot. So the big ones that it can come from is Mark Andrews, which would be 11 million in cap savings. That would be helpful. But of course, you're not going to cut him outright. That would have to come via trade. Do we know whether the Ravens want him or not? In their postseason presser, they made it sound like he was going to be around. But when you start crunching numbers, it's a little bit scary. Justin Tucker, based off of his play and the news and the allegations that have come out, if you just cut him outright, you're actually losing money on the cap. You're going to lose about $500,000. But if you did a post June 1 cut, then you'd be saving $4.2 million. So that would be helpful. But then you got to go out, obviously, and find a kicker, or you got to go out and find another tight end if you move on from Mark Andrews. So not a lot of places to where you can cut people. Bobby, any thoughts or questions or anything on this part of where you could make money, but there's not a lot of places?
Yeah, it's slim pickings. And like you said, the organization's made it. I mean, there have been absolutely zero indications that they would move on from 89.
Yeah.
And then again, could be savvy business behind closed doors of what they might come up with between now and the league year, or between, in the coming months. But I mean, the fact that Brian shared that he struggled to make the list and added a couple players on there that he doesn't even feel like is realistic, but maybe just for the purpose of the exercise,
right,
kind of shows you that it could be grim.
Right. So if there's not a lot of places out of Andrews and maybe Tucker, then a lot of people will use the word restructure. Okay. And they say restructure even when they don't mean restructure. Okay. So here are some guys that you could restructure and you could create significant cap space. The problem with restructuring, Bobby, is you're taking a deal that's already done. And so you're not adding on any more years. And so when you open up money this year, all you're doing is moving the cap hit to a later year. And that hurts. So, for example, let's take a look at Lamar Jackson. The Ravens are going to have to do something with several of these guys listed here. Okay, so here's Lamar Jackson, who's going to have a $45 million cap hit. Let me be clear before things get taken out of context. Lamar Jackson 1,000,000% deserves his contract. Ever since he re-signed, all he's done is played an MVP level, got one MVP, got another best player, which I guess is not MVP, according to Achu and many other voters. That's all he's done. Whatever it takes to keep Lamar around, you do. Yep. That being said, you also want to help Lamar while he's here. So you have to manage the cap appropriately. And a lot of people will complain, well, how come you're not talking about owner's money? We could have that conversation, but let's just be clear. The cap is set by the league. And so you have to, and the NFL and NFLPA mutually agree on the cap. Okay. So Steve Bisciotti is spending everything he's allowed to spend based off of the deal that the NFL and the NFLPA agree to mutually. And then the teams get to decide how much they want to do that. So obviously Lamar deserves to be paid, but we also need to manage the cap so that you have help for him. So you look at him, he's got 45 million cap hit this year. It's a significant jump from the first 2 years of his new contract. And so Brian's saying you could restructure him and save almost $16 million. Hello, $16 million is awesome. The problem is if you do just a simple restructure, remember in next year and the year after, Lamar Jackson's cap hit is $75 million. So if you move this $15 million to future years, his cap hit is probably going to be $80 million. And Lamar needs help. Lamar's one of one, but he's not playing all the positions. He needs help. So to me, it would be irresponsible of the Ravens to do a simple restructure for him, because then you're dealing with $80 million cap hits over the next 2 years. Same thing with Marlon Humphrey. You could clear $11 million, but then that's just going to future years. You could do Roquan Smith. You could do Matabike. You could do Bateman. But all you're doing is making it harder and harder in Lamar's prime years. I don't want to do that. I want to manage the cap as smart as possible to make sure that the Ravens are getting Lamar help in his prime years. So if you're not going to do a restructure with any of these guys, and I don't think you should, I mean, maybe you could with Bateman. That money is, I mean, it's not a ton, but you're not making a ton at 1.5 million, right? Okay. So that's where the third thing comes in, and that's extensions. We've got to extend. So how is that different from a restructure? Well, you're actually adding years onto the contract, and you're adding new money. So this is where Lamar can get new money, literally a new check with millions of dollars in cash signed out to his name from the Baltimore Ravens, but they're not killing themselves in 2026 and 27, because when you add on more years, now you can spread the money across over, say, 4 or 5 more years instead of just over the next 2. Okay. So as he pointed out here, the 16 million you can make with the restructure, but then you've got 80 million over 26 and 27. So he's saying, hopefully the Ravens and Jackson can find a middle ground on an extension, which should be, fingers crossed, he writes, easier this time because the parameters would seem more defined this time around, because we know how long it took with EDC and Lamar the first time. He's like crossing his fingers. He's like, they've already got a structure. They kind of know what they're doing. So maybe it would be easier this time. He says an extension for Jackson would likely create a similar amount of cap space. You can still create 16 million, which is a ton, but you're not killing yourself in 26 and 27 because you've added on more years. Plus Lamar gets that new check with new guaranteed money. That alone could open up a massive amount of money. But you don't have to stop there. What about other extensions you could give to guys that you would like to stay around? You're not going to give extensions to guys that you're like, no, I don't believe in you beyond, 2 or 3 more years. But here's a list of 2 or 3 more guys that you could create money right now and get extensions for guys that you want around here. So Marlon Humphrey, who just had a resurgent year, and by the way, wants to retire a Raven, and by the way, is open to moving safety when the time comes. So here Brian writes that he's got $18 million due to him this season. And so he's a prime candidate for an extension. While an extension would likely not create as much cap space as a restructuring, it would extend Humphrey beyond 2026 and would allow the Ravens to spread his salary cap hits over more than 2 years remaining. So if we back up of what he could have made with the restructure, $11 million. He's saying not as much. He didn't give an exact number. So what, maybe $5 million on top of the $16 million for Lamar if you extend him. Odafe Owe, remember, he's going to play on that 5th-year option at $13.2 million. An extension, says Brian, could create $7 or $8 million this year if you want to keep Odafe around. And then Derrick Henry, we've already talked about him before, with a 2-year, $24 million extension. You're keeping him here for a total of 3 years, and you're saving as much as $5 million. So between an extension for Lamar, an extension for Marlon, an extension for Odafe, an extension for Derrick Henry, that's $32 million, and that doesn't even count what happens with Mark Andrews.
Moral of the story is extensions are preferred here.
Yes. Yeah. The question is, how does that work with Lamar Jackson? Because it did take a bit longer the last time they did it. And so if we remember, Eric DaCosta was asked by Morgan Adsit at that season-ending presser.
Yeah.
And she asked if there had been conversations yet with Lamar, or she asked, are you gonna kick it down the road? And he says, this is DaCosta's answer. He goes, yes, we've seen teams do that, meaning extend players. And Lamar Jackson and we've had a lot of discussions about contracts over the years. And at some point, I'll probably talk to Lamar. I'm just really happy and blessed to have watched him play football this year. We just finished the season. I want Lamar to relax a little bit and think back to what he accomplished as a team, what we accomplished as a team, and what he accomplished individually. We'll have those conversations probably at some point. And from what I've seen with Lamar, he's just grown so much, even just over the last couple of years. He says we communicate all the time. And as I said, I'm blessed to be with him the last 7 years. So a lot of people like you were asking people at the Super Bowl, Bobby, what do you think of a new deal and all that? And I don't think the national people were quite ready for it yet. And I think most people expect it after this year. And that could be the case because they can't do it with a $75 million cap. But Brian's suggesting that they do it now instead of then, because it'll be much harder when that $75 million is looming right away. So we'll see if that happens, but it wouldn't be surprising to me if right before free agency opens in March that we get some news of these extensions with one, some, or all of these guys.
Either that, or it's like I'm listening to the way that you're laying this out, and it's like it's either that or bust, unless you want to trade Mark Andrews, right? It's like,
well, you could do both of those, by the way.
Yeah. But if you're not going to trade him, then you have to almost for sure to go the extension route.
Yep.
So good stuff.